The India-Maldives diplomatic row started as controversial tweets from Maldivian ministers. Then came the informal boycott call of Maldives by some Indians. Soon after that, the Maldives' president called the Chinese for help. Now, a few tweets may lead to a geopolitical jumble, with the Maldives planning to reduce dependency on India across tourism, healthcare, and trade. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Data Point. It's been a little over a month since diplomatic relations between India and the Maldives turned sour. It all started when Prime Minister Narendra Modi shared photos of his trip to Lakshadweep on social media. People quickly began comparing the Union territory to the Maldives, which is located further down south in the Indian Ocean. Then, 3 deputy ministers at the Youth Ministry of the Maldives commented on these posts and made other inflammatory comments against India and Mr. Modi. And even though the Maldivian government suspended these ministers and made it clear that those comments are not representative of the country's position, it spiraled into a diplomatic row. So an informal boycott was launched against the Maldives, with everyone from Karan Johar and Ranveer Singh to regular netizens urging people to visit Lakshadweep instead. The goal was clearly to hurt the Maldives by targeting their biggest moneymaker, their tourism industry. Over the past 2 decades, the Maldives has seen a major rise in revenue generated from tourism. Revenue from tourism hit the highest level in 2022. In 2022, tourism brought in 10,430 million Maldivian rupiah. They've expanded from having 88 resorts in 2006 to 172 in 2022, which makes sense because in 2006, the Maldives saw 6 lakh tourists, and in 2022, they welcomed 16 lakh tourists. When we look at how much of the Maldives' GDP is made up of revenue from tourism, it's been between 20 to 30%, except during the pandemic, which is significantly high. The timing of this dispute and the boycott is especially unfortunate for the Maldives because the data shows that January to March are the Maldives' peak tourism months. Resorts and hotels saw the highest occupancy between January to March, and visits via tourist vessels were highest in March and April. And on top of that, since 2019, India has been the Maldives' top source of tourists. So given all of this, the question is, has the boycott made a difference? Sort of. Following the backlash, Maldives' president, Mohamed Moizu, was quick to fill in the gaps left by Indian tourists. He did this by bonding with one of India's rivals, China. Now, Moizu and Chinese President Xi Jinping met just days after the fallout with India began. The 2 leaders signed 20 key agreements, which included ones on tourism cooperation and expanding trade relations. Before 2020, the highest number of tourists to the Maldives came from China. In 2020, India took over this spot. As some Indians cancelled their plans to travel to the Maldives, Moizu filled that gap by appealing to Chinese tourists who, according to the data, obliged. When we compared tourist arrivals to the Maldives in the first 35 days of 2023 and the first 35 days of 2024, we see that tourists from China shot up from around 6,500 in 2023 to over 25,000 in 2024. Meanwhile, India's tourist numbers went down from 21,600 in 2023 to 16,800 in 2024, which is a marginal drop, while China's spike was significant. That being said, it is important to note that the decline cannot be entirely attributed to the boycott call, since many may have also canceled their plans because they feared facing repercussions because of these tensions, and of course, other unrelated reasons as well. The number of Russian tourists also decreased, so India is not the only outlier here. But the surge in Chinese tourists does mean that the drop in Indian tourists didn't really affect the Maldives' tourism. When we look at the numbers for the first 35 days of 2023 and 2024, we see that the number of tourists went up slightly from 1.9 lakh in 2023 to 2.22 lakh in 2024. And the Chinese clearly established themselves as the top visitor. But the diplomatic dispute has now gone beyond beach holidays. It's affected medical tourism as well. Generally, 20 to 40,000 medical tourists from the Maldives visit India annually for treatment. But on January 13th, Mr. Moizu announced that his government's health insurance scheme will cover visits to the United Arab Emirates and Thailand as well, to, quote, diminish reliance on a select group of countries, unquote. This announcement came immediately after he visited President Xi. Moizu also said that a 100-bed hospital would be built with Chinese aid. Beyond this, Moizu and Xi also signed agricultural schemes, which Moizu said would, quote, end its dependence on one country for imported staple foods such as rice, sugar, and flour, unquote. Instead, he wants to grow these products locally. And it's not hard to guess who that one country is. The Maldives currently relies heavily on India for several products, ranging from food to medicines to construction materials. The Maldives sources over 80% of rice from India. 60% of eggs and nearly 30% of cattle meat also come from India. 50% of onions, melons, and nuts, and over 45% of crabs, shrimp, prawns, and cabbages, 40% of tomatoes, and 25% of wheat are all imported from India. Over 60% of medicaments come from India, and over 95% of its granite, 65% of its flat-rolled iron and stainless steel sheets, and 40% of its steel bars and coils are all from India. So the fruits and vegetables on those stunning floating plates, most of it was probably grown here, and a majority of the shining granite floorings also came from India. Shifting its reliance away from India to other countries, China or otherwise, is a major task, but Moizu seems to be quick to put this plan into action. India also relies on the Maldives for some of its exports too. India exports 70% of its cabbage and cauliflowers to the Maldives. Over 20% of eggs and over 10% of melons, live animals, and nuts all go to the Maldives. This diplomatic row and the social media war, if you will, now has trade and geopolitical consequences. What the long-term impact of this and how effective Moizu's new policies will be remains to be seen. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure you're subscribed to the Hindu's YouTube channel so that you do not miss the next one.